Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. I'm your host, Victor, and on this podcast, we go week to week, watching something along with you, providing some insight and recommendations along the way. In today's episode, we have arrived at the penultimate episode of the season, the first season of Pluribus, an episode called Charm Offensive. And indeed, Carol and the Hive Mind are both on the Charm Offensive here. I have a feeling Manuso is not so great in the Charm Offensive department. But let's see what he's like when he meets another un-Hive Mind person like Carol. Sona will be joining the conversation, and I can't wait to hear what she thought of last week's episode, and of course this week's episode specifically, even more specifically. Some quick podcast news. First of all, for the following episode of Pluribus, the episode will be dropping on the 24th officially, which means usually the 23rd at night. So not sure how I'm going to deliver this considering the holidays and such. You can probably expect to have a very quick episode minimally with just me on it. But then subsequently, I have not, by the way, listened to any other Pluribus podcasts except dipping into the official one just for production notes, but haven't been engaging with the conversation online of different theories and such. So once the show wraps up, I will be doing all of that deep dive, listening to other podcasts, reading Reddit boards, etc., and we'll probably reconvene after the holidays with multiple co-hosts, probably my sister, Sona, of course, Darren, of course, as well, to think about the season as a whole and delve into some conspiracies that did or did not pay out. I enjoy this, especially with this type of show, so expect to see multiple episodes, but those won't be standalone episodes. I will probably include in all those individual Pluribus conversations, touch bases with each one of those co-hosts and some of you out there as well. I'll reach out to you separately to get your favorite shout-outs of the year. What movies did you see that you think aren't getting enough attention at the end of the year? What TV shows, especially if they're foreign shows, would you like to shout out that you feel like maybe were underappreciated or perhaps were never covered here on the podcast at all? And if any of you out there, listeners, want to participate in that year-end, those set of episodes, reach out to us through any of our available channels. The easiest one, of course, especially if you want to leave us a voice memo. I'd love to hear from you vocally and include it in the episodes themselves. Simply record a voice memo on your smartphone and then attach it to an email to needssomeintroduction@gmail.com. But of course, if you just want to shout something out without recording any audio, just send us an email, needssomeintroduction@gmail.com, or post it under any one of these episodes in Spotify. If you put a comment, even under the earlier episodes, we receive all of them. So post your favorite film of the year, post anything you want to shout out, even if it's just a performance you think, maybe a performance in a film or TV show that didn't get that much attention. And of course, if your favorites are also the consensus favorites, feel free to shout those out as well. I have a lot of catching up to do to make my top 10 list, which I do also expect to publish probably on the 2nd of January. That's my expected publication date, which will aggregate anybody who reaches out to me by, let's say, the 31st. I'll try to include all that content in that episode. And I have a pretty long list. It's been a pretty good year for movies and for TV as well. Something I'll be watching this weekend with my daughter in IMAX in 3D, I've already bought the tickets, is the latest Avatar, which initially the reviews were pretty strong and have been dipping downwards. Although none of the Avatar movies have had these bulletproof reviews before, and I've enjoyed the first two very much. So can't wait for my daughter to have this experience, and of course, I do hope that this film will be on my best of list. Remains to be seen, of course. But I have so many other films that I am still waiting to see. I think I looked at a website called Critics Top 10, which compiles all of the top 10 films of the year, all the critics lists together. And I've seen about half of the listed films. Many of those I do not think are going to make my list, and some of them are so obscure I probably won't be able to watch them. But a lot of them are pretty easy to access, and I still have not caught up with them. So I will be catching up on a lot of movies in the next couple of weeks. The big ones that are yet to come, of course, are the Avatar film, and then next week, Marty Supreme, which is also getting rave reviews. So I will definitely be watching both of those and trying to catch up on a lot of these smaller films by that deadline, January 2nd. But I probably will. I was just negotiating this with myself. I will probably try to catch up with a lot of the gaps. A lot of things that I want to see are not available conveniently to stream and not even in theaters yet. So I probably will wait until after the Academy Award nominations and make any revisions to my list at that point. That'll give me a few more weeks to catch up. So expect that all over the holidays and probably a conversation there. Of course, another really big cultural event is the wrap up the series finale, these last batch of episodes for Stranger Things. My sister's a huge fan of Stranger Things, so can't wait to have a conversation with her, probably in the same conversation when we do our year-end wrap-up, also discussing those final episodes of Stranger Things. Oh, and of course, in my conversation with Darren, we will not only be talking year-end stuff, we will also be discussing the first episode of Fallout, the Amazon Prime post-apocalyptic game adaptation. So all of that will be in the next week or so. And I've probably already mentioned this. I can't even remember after that whole diatribe I just put out there, after all of this preamble. But the Pluribus episode will premiere on the evening, this is East Coast time, the evening of the 23rd. So very small gap between now and the finale. Very exciting. All right, so before I bring Sona in on a conversation, I did want to break down this most recent episode in some detail to make sure I don't really miss anything. This, I believe, is the shortest episode of the season up to now, although the finale will be the longest. And this episode is called Charm Offensive. Now, very interesting. I have to keep thinking about the fact that this has been a relatively short period of time. And also, I think it is very important that it says something about Carol's personality, that she needed to be alone for 30 days, alone in the desert, not quite 40 days, but she needed this reprieve from the Hive Mind before she actually came to the understanding of something that we pitched here on the show quite a few episodes back, that you catch more bees with honey. Carol, if you want to know what your enemy is up to, you have to cozy up to them. You got to have close enough to them to be able to see. And I think she has been learning this over time, especially when even though Mr. Diabate is not as, or doesn't have the same agenda that she has to eradicate this mind virus, that she did get the example from him that he knew all these things that she thought were shocking revelations way before she did, simply because he had more intimacy with this thing. And of course, even if you consider this thing your enemy, the fact that it cannot lie, the fact that it cannot, or that it indeed deeply wants to make you happy, it would be pretty easy to manipulate this thing into revealing its own weaknesses. And thus the charm offensive of the title. Of course, the irony of the charm offensive is even though this entity sees itself as purely benevolent, it also is indeed performing a charm offensive here against Carol herself. But before we get to all of that, of course, we see Manuso's awakening. We do not get a timestamp here, so I do not know how long he's been knocked out. Of course, last week in the Darien Gap, he was gravely injured and rescued by the others. But we also know that he's a true hardliner in not accepting any help from them. Although, of course, come on, buddy. You know what? You didn't ask about how much of that helicopter flight cost. But he comes to in this hospital. Manusos truly will not play the game of interacting with these others in a polite way, even if it is to destroy them. And I think, importantly, I call this out because this philosophical divide between him and Carol is what is going to be explored, apparently, in season 2, given the fact that they're not going to meet until the season finale. As soon as he is conscious, once again, we do not know how long this has been, he immediately needs to get himself out of that situation. As much of it as a hardliner as he seems to be, of course, no one can truly be pure, even to their best intentions, or even he cannot be truly pure. And I think that is something that's being commented on here as well. He wants an itemized bill to pay the other people, not you, but the people you used to be, which of course is just so performative. And who are you performing for, other than trying to be a true hardliner because of the fact that who's going to come collect this money? Come on, give me a break. And of course, it's not just the medical bill. How about the hospital, the helicopter rescue? How about the ambulance you just stole, right? So there's no way to be as pure. And in my opinion, in for a penny, in for a pound. This is just my personal opinion. I would play along and be like, sure, just go with the flow and until I have my opportunity and enjoy myself too along the way. By the way, this is his philosophy seems so self-flatulating to an extent that for no real reason and really no benefit. He could have been with Carol right now plotting this whole time if he had just accepted the fact that he cannot be alone in the world. But apparently he thinks he can. But of course, as part of him receiving the medical bill, he finds out that he is in Panama. So he is now on the other side of Darien Gap. So he can continue his drive to New Mexico in the stolen ambulance. This seems to have taken quite some time because if we assume that this episode is occurring at the same time that we see Carol's timestamp, there are still quite a few weeks before he arrives. In Carol's world, we pick up immediately after last week's events, after collapsing into the arms of Zosia. She's making them pink lemonade, and the charm offensive begins. And this is, I have to say, after last week's episode, you may have heard my comments there, I thought that the show had become really a metaphorical thought experiment, and we have it yet again here. You can almost lay a perfect metaphor on top of each one of these episodes, and using the idea of alien mind glue to explore very different topics. The dichotomy of the immigration experience in Manuso's trek through South and Central America last week versus the people who live in the United States, of course, who oftentimes benefit from the labor of those people who are arriving, or the very funny exploration of having everybody, like the metaphor of being broken up with, but imagine it's everybody. You are now truly isolated with nobody will date you. And that idea of going through a breakup and being like, I'm the one who's making the demands of this relationship, and then being like, no, I'm breaking up with you. And being like, what happened? And Carol's shock of that. But of course, it's not like she broke up with one person, I got to start all over again. It is being broken up with all possible options. So being truly isolated. So each one of these episodes has explored very thematic metaphor in one episode after the other. And again, we have it here. But all that is to say that I was feeling like other than this kind of playing with these ideas and slowly developing this mystery in the background, would this be maybe frustrating to audiences? But I got to say, I love this episode. It's so incredible how they've been able to coalesce so many things here and again, drive the plot forward. And then at the same time, tie together so many things and revealing so many things, finally revealing so many things simply by having this charm offensive, allowing Carol to spend some time with Zosia and via Zosia, finding out all these questions we've been asking this whole entire season. How does this thing work? Really, how does this work? But of course, we also have the metaphor of dating. You meet somebody new, you get to know them, you have your agenda, you're a version of yourself, they are a version of themselves. What are they showing you about themselves? And this back and forth. And even though this entity is on its sleeve, on paper, basically, completely transparent in its intentions, there actually is an agenda here, right? Like keeping her placated is a way to not disrupt things. So in and of itself, even as it is transparently just doing exactly what it's saying, it is still manipulating in its own ways. Two different forms of manipulation. And honestly, this is what I really like in spy shows. I really like this idea of having to play a role, but then inhabit that role at the same time. And then do you end up compromising yourself? Or is it okay to compromise yourself for the broader goal? So all of this is really fascinating as a metaphor for like spy tropes, but also this charm offensive, literally, right? This idea of being love bombed, basically, by this entity, whether it's sincere or not. Anyway, things are awkward at the beginning. I love this whole idea that someone has come back into your life. The breakup is now being renegotiated. Carol's made some pink lemonade, but awkwardly is like, I don't even know what to talk about. And Zosia, using all of her, the knowledge of the entire planet, collectively, suggests, hey, let's just play a game or something. I love the idea, of course, that it's, well, you're going to be better at chess at me because you are at least partially, a chess master. So what game could they play? And they say, hey, let's just play Spit. It doesn't require, you can't be a genius. You can't be a genius at Spit. Although, of course, you could have quicker reflexes, but that could be pretty arbitrary as well, too. It's the type of game that you can lose against your kids, right? So perfect type of thing for a superior being to play with this normal human Carol. And there's such fascinating things that are done in this episode. First of all, the idea that this entity isn't just performing this joy of winning this game against Carol, of busting her chops repeatedly when she loses. On the one hand, yeah, Carol probably appreciates this. She likes that playfulness. This being knows this about her as well. But on some level, I think it's what's very interesting here is that it is open to interpretation. I can't wait to hear what Sona thinks of it. But I think it is sincere. This entity wants companionship, right? Once it has sopped up everybody else in the world, the only unpredictable variables come from this remaining ununified group of people, which, for its own selfish reasons, you would assume they would want to cultivate these outliers rather than force integration of them. So it is interesting that they are, in a way, battling their own programming to incorporate these people because they could just shrug their shoulders and say, well, maybe it's supposed to be this way. And by the way, I like having someone other than me to talk to every single day. And yet they are driven to impose this on them because something in this programming drives them to want to merge everybody. There should be no outliers, which again, we can speculate on what that means. And maybe I'll save that for the conversation with Sona. A couple of interesting things happened during this game of Spit. One is this interesting way, and I honestly don't know what my reaction would be as well, this idea of saying, well, your cousin's not that far away. One of these cousins who apparently used to play Spit with her a long time ago. They can come visit you. And Carol says, well, what would be the difference of speaking to you? Don't you guys have the same collective memory, basically? And she's like, Zosia's kind of like, yeah, you're right. But no, for you, it might feel better. And she says, Carol says that, well, he would have come if he had wanted to, which is interesting, right? Because in a way, he is there, is present. But I guess she meant that he never visited before the mind merge. So it just illustrates, again, the complexity and even trying to negotiate a quote unquote relationship, a true relationship with this being. Another interesting point is she doesn't even know where the game Spit came from. You have to assume that whoever originated the game Spit was, or someone very close to that person, would still be alive considering the game hasn't been around that long. But it just speaks to the fact that some things are just unknowable. Like, we used to play that game. Did I invent that game? Did my grandfather invent that game? Did I name it Spit, but it's an old game? Like, it's just unknowable things. So that there are still mysteries. There are still unknowable things in this episode. And we see that quite a few times. Carol asks, where do they sleep at night? And Zosia says, hey, I will show you. Oh, and of course, very importantly, asks him to power wash the comeback off of the street. Interesting, I saw this in my headlines, that this was spoiled by Google Earth, that someone posted this. And I guess if you live out there, you know what house this is. So I think it's interesting that someone must have been stalking the Google Maps for this house to see this come back and posted it on social media. But how long did they sit on that? It's because this was shot a long time ago. Anyway, I don't understand that. Maybe I have to do some additional research on this, how this popped up on Google Maps. So did someone know that the show was shooting there and then stalk Google Maps until this showed up and then posted it? A bigger mystery than what's going on at the show, honestly. So Carol hangs out with Zosia, discovers that in the local arena, I do wonder if all these advertisements, like the State Farm agent and such in the background, if these numbers are legit, because these people are getting free advertisement. In the arena, all these folks are sleeping together. And a couple of things, we've been speculating on this. Are they all in one place? Are they still in their individual homes? And of course, no, they are all in one central place because it's more energy efficient to keep everybody in one location. And why are they so concerned with preserving so much energy when they are now, even if they were living in these different locations and used half as much energy as before, they could still use significantly less energy than before. They don't need to communicate or maintain all this communication, except for Carol, of course. But it's because they need that energy for something else. And we'll find out about that over the course of the episode. And then we see a dog. Another question we've been having. Are all mammals impacted by this? It did seem to impact lab rats, and then, of course, that spread to humans. So presumably it could spread between rats, but not between dogs, which is totally possible, by the way. There are definitely diseases that spread through some mammals and not others. But we asked this question, what happens to the pets? They set them all free and they can go out and do whatever they want in the wild. But I explicitly asked that question here on the podcast that dogs don't just wander off. They are attached to you. They want to look you in the eye, you specifically, their owner or their person, and hang out with you. That's what they want. They want to be at your side. We've bred them to be these type of creatures. So, of course, this dog is there. Very sweet. He is a good boy. And again, I gotta say, very intentional here, I started to really like the entity here, not see it as any kind of threat, even though it might be completely misguided, and I do not want to be unified, my personal opinion. However, I did start to really like this entity, and it seems to like this dog, and it seems to like Carol, it seems to like her books. It is a true, dangerous charm offensive in the fact that you can see how Mr. Diabate has been having this type of interaction with this thing, this being, for the past couple of months. And of course, it is the perfect mate in every possible way. It is like dating a superhero. Darren and I have just been rewatching The Watchmen here on the podcast. And it is like dating Dr. Manhattan. He knows everything. He can make the lights go on and off in other cities at the drop of a hat. You are dating a superhero, basically. And there's something really charming about that, especially when this superhero, this Superman, basically, the Superman movie that we just saw this summer, let's say, that this super being is choosing to spend its time with you. There's something truly charming about that, of course, and seductive. But back to the dog. So, of course, very sweet, this interaction with the dog. And of course, dogs love to be with people, cuddle with people. They just want their love and attention. But another thing that emerges explicitly over the course of this episode, and I've speculated on this as well, and I could still be wrong about this. I think Alan will disagree with me. Alan, can't wait to hear your email about this episode. That I do still think that there is a localized experience to these individuals. Because even here, when everybody is cuddled up on the floor, what does she call it? A cuddle puddle? Later on in her notes. They obviously are using their body heat I think it's explicit. That's part of the efficiency of keeping everybody in one place. And on the same schedule, of course, so that everybody can work at the same time, sleep at the same time, eat at the same time. But I did notice as I was watching people in the background, they do smile at each other. They do literally, in some cases, put a hand on each other as they cuddle next to each other. So why do you need that if you don't have a personalized experience? And it is fascinating. Carol could leave at any time. Carol could choose to sleep in a separate room, but I think she's already being seduced. I don't think this is just her being calculating in her participation. I think there is some aspect of this where she does crave this companionship, and we explicitly see it, right? She wakes up in the middle of the night. She has chosen not to sleep in a separate area, the way they made a bed for her in a separate room, but amongst them all, and she has almost cuddled up to Zosia. Oh, and just one more thing on the dog, of course. The dog is attached to a particular human. It doesn't care that it has some hive mind. Of course, the dog is used to looking at that human, being pet by that human, being fed by that human, and is still emotionally attached to that human. In the same way, honestly, that these survivors who have surviving family members, that they look at these people, it's quite the opposite, right? That person now is the entity. So it's the opposite experience. But you look at them, and that is the person you have bonded with. And very importantly, we explicitly see that happen between Carol and Zosia in this very episode. The date ends. Carol reluctantly ends it. And once again, you could say this is all a performance. I don't think so. I think she really craves, after all this time alone, she really enjoyed being amongst other people. But of course, under it all, she's still driving to do discovery and continue this investigation of how this thing works and how it can be undone. And of course, she makes way more notes. You catch more bees with honey, Carol. Honey. And I love that the very first thing she writes is, "They eat people!" exclamation, or underline, I guess. And maybe an exclamation point as well. So if we had any questions, there definitely is some element of her being seduced here. But has she really completely reformed? Nope. She has made many discoveries, and she puts them all here on her whiteboard. But the first one is, they eat people. The next day, Zosia and Carol go for a hike. They're on this top of some mountain, I believe, or maybe a mesa. And again, I love this exploration of this as a dating metaphor, and that here we have this entity that has all this knowledge and all of these experiences. And when Carol says, I love trains and I love the sound of a train, I don't know if she made this up, but I do think it's sincere. I love Zosia's reaction here. She's like, I didn't know that. Shocked to herself that she can still be surprised to not know something, because this is going back to my AI and how AI potentially needs this fear of AI, obviously, which is legitimate, but this relationship that eventually we will have with AI, that AI can only summarize Wikipedia articles at this point anyway, right? To invent something new, you still need somebody to invent that thing for AI to now learn that. I always make this metaphor. I work in technology, so I make the metaphor that it's, yes, AI is great at writing code that is similar to code that was written before. But if you said, hey, I want to write a new programming language, can you come up with the greatest programming language of all times based on all of this knowledge you have? It would come up with some very generic thing or basically fail at it completely. It would not be able to innovate. It would just be able to iterate. Now, iteration is a form of invention. So, over time, it could get better at that or iterate so many times that it does accidentally invent something new. Yeah, I got it. But it still is a limitation in this moment. And there is still this revelation to Zosia that, wow, that's something I didn't know. And it speaks to the value that Carol and the other unmerged folks still provide. And of course, we see that explicitly in the writing of a new chapter of this ongoing saga. There are no new stories. Sure, Shakespeare, I can read it anytime I want. It exists already. It's better than anything Carol's written. But if you want a new story from scratch, Carol, as far as we know, other than maybe there's some of these other people are writers too, who I doubt it though, Carol may be the only fiction writer left on the planet. So think about the value of these stories that she's writing now. And again, what a seduction that she probably always felt embarrassed that she's writing these books and she's not really a truly great writer. And now all of a sudden, this is a captive audience that legitimately loves everything you write because it is the only option for new fiction. But back to that mountaintop, the train whistle, the loneliest sound she's ever heard. Again, she might invent this, but it is so beautiful. And I love that idea that, and again, this seduction, that both of them are discovering each other in a new way. And again, the metaphor of dating, right? That the person you're dating for the first time, that thrill of it is this exploration, this discovery of the other person. And this is also when she starts to explain how this mind glue works, although they're not 100% aware of how it works yet, but there is a natural electric charge in our bodies, and it's somehow resonating, transmitting some kind of signal that other folks can resonate with. And this is the mechanism with which they communicate. And I thought at this moment that, of course, we have Manusos, and we have the fact that this thing was transmitted through this radio signal. And I was thinking that Manusos, when he heard that signal last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever that was, that the signal he found was the original transmission, and that it would be used, and maybe this is still in there anyway, that maybe that you would interpret the signal and there's some additional message encoded in there beyond the actual sequencing of the DNA or RNA, I guess it would be, that there was some additional message that might be interpreted. But then I started thinking, wait a second, if they are transmitting their own signal to each other, maybe Manusos has found the frequency in which they communicate with each other. And that could be interesting because some kind of dampener that prevents that frequency from transmitting could be the way to break the bond. And maybe if the bond is broken even temporarily across the board, maybe it breaks the mind glue. I don't know if I'm speculating a lot here, and I don't know if that makes sense fully because it worked on an individual and then spread to another person. So I guess it could spread again, even if my theory is correct. Anyway, not sure how this all works, but I do think that it's something in that set of details I just threw in there. So of course, very importantly, they are communicating. So discussion I've been having with a couple of different emailers about whether there is a localized experience or not. And I was just talking to my wife about this. By the way, she's a few episodes behind, but I rewatched 3 episodes with her last night. She binged 3 episodes. Still now with this episode, another 3 episodes to go. But she's getting close. And with the holidays, she'll catch up. But interesting to rewatch those episodes because it reminds me of the conversations I've had on the side with listeners that the idea that the hive mind out there is controlling everybody. Everyone's having the exact same experience at the exact same time. And I always felt like that doesn't make sense because could you imagine your mind, but your mind has not only 7 billion eyeballs that it's receiving information from, but also that those 7 billion eyeballs are not waiting for you to respond from this one central brain, as opposed to this idea that this is a network of like a brain made out of like an actual network of computers, the way it is done. Like AI basically is built this way by nesting all these different computers to each other, but each one is doing a separate task and then collectively it's giving you a result. So anyway, point being that it's almost like a network communicating with itself. So something happens to somebody and then that makes its way through the network and arrives at some central synchronization point. And now everybody has that memory. But the point is, in the moment, the person, explicitly here in this episode, by the way, the person receiving the massage is receiving the massage and enjoying the massage. And now the hive mind has a recollection of, oh, it was so nice getting that massage. But the experience itself was only in one location. It was localized and then uploaded. So the reason I mention all this is because I do think that obviously the directive of the individual is to ignore the individual experience to the collective. It's like subordinate to the collective hive mind. However, it is there in the moment making the decision to do whatever. Then, of course, retroactively, it was the decision of the hive mind, but no, it was not. The person locally using the hive mind for direction is making a decision, having an experience, and then communicating it back to the hive mind. And I think that's how it works because it's the only thing that's tenable, right? There's no way that any mind of any size, a single mind, could tell 7 billion people at the exact same time what to do. It would be impossible, right? The queue of requests would be so massive that it would be impossible. You would be basically stuck. If you build a computer system, once again, I work in technology. If you build a computer system and you have a central machine that is making all the decisions in very short order because of scaling and because of network latency, if there's any kind of latency anywhere in the system, you create a bottleneck that basically leads to complete failure. At some point, you need to have local programming that is then communicates to some central location and then feeds back out again. It's the only way it works. And I'm pretty sure that's how this network of folks works similarly. If they've thought about it, maybe it's all magic, right? But I don't think so. I think that this is going to be part of the solution to this because you could imagine that you can now disconnect these people. And it goes back to the idea that if you did disconnect these people, would they simply just become the person they were before? I don't believe that because this person now has lost its connection to the hive mind, but remembers what that experience was like. So it would be like the worst withdrawal. We've literally had this idea that people are having a withdrawal from drugs in the last episode of Rewatch with my wife, which is like now 3 episodes ago. I'm confusing myself with this rewatch, but I've thought about how this warm, fuzzy feeling you have from this unification is a form of a narcotic that provides comfort to these people. So when inevitably, I think it's going to happen in the show, maybe not this season, maybe next season, the connection is broken, there could be an excruciating withdrawal from that. And many people are not going to be happy about it, just as we speculated on previously. So I love the illustration, of course, touching on all these things we've speculated on before, of the actual massage. Are you massaging yourself? In a way, yes. That's the recollection of it. Or I should say, the recollection is of having both experiences, but in the moment, you are experiencing the pleasure of the massage. I like that multiple times in this episode, we get to see the large scar left over from the grenade incident from a few episodes back. This reminder physically of what Carol did to Zosia and how we are reminded of it multiple times. And I guess theoretically she is as well. Next fascinating scene, of course, is this is really when I thought about the Dr. Manhattan metaphor, going on a date with Superman or whoever your superhero of choice is. Zosia is showing Carol, here's where the radio transmission came from. It's from this planet. she's asking, what do the aliens look like there? And of course, this is logical. They have no idea because they don't have any recollections of the beings there. This mind glue only links them to each other. It's not transmitting memories from other beings from another planet. But of course, they're worshipful of this entity, or I should say this intelligence out there, because it gave them this mind glue that has created this sense of peace and wonder in themselves. And when Carol's like, I can't quite see it, there's too much light pollution, Zosia, of course, is able to turn off all the lights. And of course, this is amazing power to, and very seductive to be this most powerful being on the planet ever, is in this moment paying all its attention to you. Actually, probably not all to you, but it does feel that way for sure. And of course, this leads to the revelation that we've suspected for quite some time, that they are building a giant antenna somewhere, and they need all the power in the world so that they can transmit this signal, the same signal, into space. So another hop on this massive network of transmitting these signals from one location to another. Now, if you actually think about the logistics of this, it's very likely that whatever species lives on that other planet may very well be extinct on that planet. I do want to make that clear, on that planet, because I have a theory. Because think about the amount of time it takes for this signal to be transmitted from a location so far away, and then to arrive on this planet, which is probably, we're probably seeing an iteration of this. They built another giant antenna. They broadcast it they have the same type of knowledge we had only millions and millions of years ago for the signal to have reached us. And that they are like, this is the most likely place that will have intelligent life. So now it has arrived here. It's been probably bombarding the planet this whole entire time. And finally, someone noticed it and the virus has spread to us. And now we will look at other candidate planets and bombard them. And that will be our only goal, to build a giant antenna to broadcast this to other species. Of course, they'd have to be very similar in to have DNA and RNA and to react to this virus the same way. So there's a lot of gotchas there. There might be other types of other species. Even on Earth, we're seeing certain species that are not getting infected by this. So a lot of unknowns in how logistically possible this would be. But again, I have a theory. By the way, I want to correct something. I have actually pulled up her whiteboard when she's writing. There's a giant antenna. All the power in the world is being used to send this signal. And Kepler 226, which is the location of this signal, is not, I was like, this has got to be like millions of light years away. This is 640 light years away. So obviously a very long time ago. However, you could imagine that at 640 light years, 640 years away, that, you could have seen the Earth with a very powerful telescope, for example, and seen that there was a civilization here. Obviously, if this was millions of years ago, whatever was out there would have been looking at Earth and going, well, maybe there'll be life that is intelligent life that we can see in a million years. But that, of course, is just all guesswork. But and by the way, if there was intelligent life this close to us, we obviously would have discovered it by now. However, this is obviously a TV show, and we got to make some concessions. I should have said we probably would have found it already, not definitely, because the sky's very big. And then I love this moment, another intentional, unintentional digression that they've thrown into Carol's investigation. She needs more dry erase markers, and excitedly Zosia's like, oh, are you writing? And of course, Carol takes a break from her conspiracy whiteboard and goes back to her writing whiteboard. This cute dating ritual continues the next day when Carol and Zosia go play croquet at the local football stadium. Again, all these little cute details. I love that the scoreboard is mocking Carol as she's getting beat. And a little more understanding here about the fact that, well, how are you so good at croquet? Sure, some of your unified intellects were good at polo and have a certain technique, but you personally do not have that physical experience. But I think this actually makes sense because you think about the fact that it's not just your physical dominance that makes you good at a sport. It's the technique you learn, the efficiency of movement, the way to hit the ball to generate the greatest amount of power or accuracy in placing the ball. And that is something that you can transmit via this shared consciousness. Now, if she was against someone else who had the exact same amount of awareness and knowledge, I should say, but is significantly more physically dominant, Zosia, this physical manifestation would probably perform worse. Another way to think about that is someone who is Zosia's size versus John Cena are going to go lift weights that John Cena, obviously, because he has more muscles, is going to lift more weight than Zosia will. But Zosia versus somebody who is of her size that is untrained, if they were both untrained, then Zosia would do better because she has technique. She's actually done this in her mind. She's actually done this activity before. And I think that's what's being represented there. And I think it will matter in some way that there are limitations to how adept you're going to be at a particular skill. And just in general terms, I like the fact that this really feels like a rom-com at this point, continues to have multiple things happening at the same time. Carol, of course, is continuing to try to do some discovery here. She has her own agenda, but she's also being wooed, and that understanding, or at least us experiencing this love bombing and wondering to ourselves, is this real? Is she really into me? Or is this just part of this performance? Is this just her part of that need to people please? And is there a difference between those two things? Really intriguing here, and still explaining how this hive mind works in the context of this actual date. And then another truly incredible and revelatory scene in this episode where Zosia takes Carol to where she used to go initially to write, where she first started to write. And we see something we saw before, the elaborate James Bond-like poker game in Las Vegas. And now again, this massively staged, recreated. Think about the effort here, right? Like that, even though they are trying to preserve all energy for this giant radio station, what is the net win for this entity to have rebuilt this diner exactly to the specifications of before, just to give Carol this warm, fuzzy feeling of when she first started to write, and to encourage her to write some more? So again, I think it's open to debate as to whether this entity is just distracting Carol so that she's not as focused on her investigation, and or does get some kind of pleasure from staging these recreations. And it did again make me think about, well, what was the purpose of the Vegas poker game as well? The simple fact is, if giving pleasure to somebody else provides pleasure to you, then as elaborate as this is, there is a pleasurable aspect to it. So is this the way that this entity experiences pleasure? Or is this all just part of its programming? It just must do all it can to provide pleasure to this other. But then the question remains, why program this entity to be a people pleaser when theoretically there will be no outsider consciousnesses, or not? And that's the question I'll leave for the very end, just as a teaser for all you out there. Again, though, this is just this beautiful scene where you see that Carol obviously is starting to lose herself. She's starting to lose herself in this fantasy. She has gone into this knowing full well that she is going to participate as part of discovery. This is where the spy metaphor is so rich, but is wooed. She is seduced by the fantasy. And she's amazed that even they've recreated the seats with even the flaws in it in the same places, the tape in the same place. And as she's caught up this reverie of remembering what it was like when she was struggling to write. And of course, this beautiful idea we've all probably dealt with, that sometimes when the struggle was there, it's what made the rewards so much more pleasurable. So little rewards. She now probably sells millions of books collectively across this whole entire series. She's probably very rich from selling these books, at least modestly wealthy. And she puts out another book and she adds hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, to her wealth. And maybe if the history had gone differently here in the course of the show, it would be adapted into a TV series at some point, and then she'd make millions of dollars additional to that. But when she had nothing and she was just grinding it out and just starting to write that first book, the pleasure of just being able to accomplish it, and I can only imagine when that first book was published, the joy of that as well. And Carol's lost this memory of those early pleasures. And then the illusion is shattered, not because it's not quite correct, but that it is too correct. She's actually brought back that waitress, that kindly waitress that would keep refilling her coffee and never asked her to leave. And Carol suddenly snaps out of it and thinks to herself, what are the logistics of making this happen? That person is no longer a person. You have torn her away from her marriage, from her new life, just here to perform this for me? Of course, that ironically is, again, the metaphor that we're seeing here. Yet another metaphor is this metaphor of performance, of making a TV show, of creating a fantasy for someone else to live inside of. And if this entity actually gets some pleasure from that, then don't you need an audience? And that comes back, and that here we have this irony here that Zosia and this entity itself wants Carol to write more books, probably to keep her distracted from her investigation while they try to woo her into merging with them, but also probably because they want something new to read. There is nothing new to read. So this is the only opportunity they have. So they want Carol to be in that place to create a world, right? What do writers do? Create a fantasy world for the reader to live in. So they want Carol to perform that for them. And what are they doing for her? The same thing, recreating a fantasy for her to go into, so that in the same way, they are the creators of this universe for her to live in. The difference, of course, is they want, and this goes back to that AI, yet again, I'm going to go back to that AI metaphor, that Carol can invent a new story, and all they can give her is a perfect facsimile of something that has already existed. And then we get to the final scene, or the final section of the episode. Such an eventful episode for a relatively short one, where Carol finally confronts Zosia. She's stormed off at this point, and of course, she's back at her house. Zosia arrives, and they start having a conversation about why did you storm off? And Carol just lays it all out there. She admits, and I think this is part of the reason she stormed off, the realization that these people, or reminder, I should say, that these people have been co-opted from lost their individuality, literally being flown across the country just to make her happy. But at the same time, she has now had an actual relationship, probably what she was afraid of for a very long time, with this entity, and likes it. She admits it. I like you, you collective you. I like you. I enjoy my time with you. But of course, she says explicitly, this is a train wreck. You guys are dying, and you will not even take action to save your own lives. There's something wrong. And very interestingly, I love that Carol starts to spin out and then reins herself in, of course, because she knows what the consequences can be, but then gets very emotional to be like, I need to put things right. It's just something I'm driven to do. I think this is wrong. You guys are going to literally die if you do not change the way you do things. And admits that maybe if I don't stop my investigation, you'll all leave me again. And she gets very emotional here, just thinking about being alone again. And then this is really where I want to start the conversation with Sona. This moment when Zosia kisses her. And it feels spontaneous, but is it calculating? Is it both at the same time somehow? Really just incredible that it makes you think at that moment. Again, thinking about this courtship metaphor, that how these events almost arise out of that, out of those interactions. And then is there an agenda? Is there not? Is it both at the same time? Really, for me, fascinating. And the next morning, Zosia wakes up and hears the typing, and there's no one there. There's no audience for her to perform, but she smiles to herself, this entity, of course, via Zosia. So happy that the typing is occurring, happy that Carol is writing again. Is she happy because Carol's happy when she's writing, despite the fact she says she's not? Is she happy because she'll get to read something new? Is she happy because Carol is distracted from her need to find a way to unravel this thing? Is it all of those three things? Probably some combination. And again, I feel like all open for interpretation here, by the way, but I feel that when Zosia's read the chapter, Carol obviously is nervous for the opinion of Zosia, but Zosia, of course, the perfect audience, not only loves the book, not only at some aspect of this entity has been truly loves these books, has had their lives saved by these books. Who could ask for a better audience? And knows the mythology of this thing in and out. And then we jump weeks later. We're now 60 days in. I think we were at 45 at the end of last. So 2 weeks have passed now. The radio is on. Very important little detail. The radio is on. There's a DJ on. It's not Spotify with AI-generated DJ. It is a radio station with a DJ. So she's requested it. That's the radio. She wants to listen to some jazz. The radios are back on again. The host is back at doing his job again. And then here we go again. Yet another incredible moment in the show. First of all, over the course of this entire episode, Carol's like, would it kill you to use the word I? Apparently in the past 2 weeks, Zosia has gotten more comfortable in saying the word I, and how different it is. It's this incredible illusion that Carol is created for herself. That by simply performing and saying exactly the same things, but saying I instead of we, even in just seeing this beautifully framed shot as this actress is conveying this story of her favorite flavored food, and then of course it turns out to be ice cream, the flavor of ice cream specifically, that just using the word I suddenly personalizes it in a way that makes the illusion, it's still an illusion by the way, more powerful and way more seductive, by the way. You start to feel like, yes, I'm having a relationship with this one person. But simultaneously, this being having to do something that it probably doesn't normally do, which is to now not think about the noise of all these memories at once, but honing in on just the experience of Zosia and then going back in time and what was your favorite food? What was your favorite? And then not only the favorite food, but then why? Why did she love this mango ice cream so much? And this memory of her as a child. And for a moment, again, this show's always playing with our expectations. For a moment, it seems like Zosia is frozen for a second. And it's like we're thinking, oh my God, this forcing the entity to have a personalized memory and experience is somehow a way to short circuit this. But no, she simply is frozen for a second, getting communication that Manuso is on his way. And I love the little expression change here. She's not happy. Of course, she's known this the whole time. Manuso has been on his way for quite some time, but not happy that Manuso is very close at the border, actually. Manuso is still treating these horrible wounds on his back. He's been, the past 2 weeks, I guess, trekking his way up north. Still in that ambulance. Luckily, right, the ambulance got a lot of supplies there for cleaning his wounds. And hydrogen peroxide. And as the episode ends, we see the sign just 31 kilometers. Just, 20 miles from the U.S. border. And Albuquerque's not that far from the border. All right, so much to unpack here. Let's get into that conversation with Sona right now. All right, Sona. So we haven't talked in a couple of weeks. Definitely want to get your opinion of last week's episode and, of course, this one's. I've actually done the plot breakdown solo because I wanted to make sure I got all the nooks and crannies in there that I wanted to explore. And also because I wanted to have more room in this conversation to just dig into some things, because I thought, a little spoiler for my general reaction as far as our conversation is, I was so fascinated by this episode. Do you agree, or how did you feel about it in general?
Are we talking about yesterday's episode or the prior one?
Let's start with yesterday's and then we'll get your reaction to the previous one as well.
I thought both of them were super interesting and intriguing. They're very different from each other, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, before we get into any kind of breakdown, I wanted to talk to you about, of course, last week or earlier, I guess it was over the weekend, the absolutely horrible story about Rob Reiner's passing.
Terrible. Oh my gosh.
And I did briefly discuss it with Darren, just this incredible run of films he had. I wanted to mention it to you because, of course, like these films are films that like I knew you at this period of time.
Yes, we grew up with them.
So I had touched on this briefly with Darren, but this incredible run, of course, Spinal Tap, which is, it's hard to believe now, but of course, this mockumentary concept wasn't really popularized then. And now, of course, you just think not only about movies like Best in Show, those type of movies, but just think about TV like The Office and Modern Family, and just even more prevalent on TV. But then, of course, I remember very vividly seeing Stand By Me in movie theaters. And then, of course, even more so when it came out on cable, that people just watched that film over and over again. And especially boys of my age, like what an incredibly powerful and important that movie was. And then 1 year later, he makes The Princess Bride, which I think is like probably an equally important film like Stand By Me, but to younger women and to everybody, but I think primarily younger women, more so, I should say. And then, of course, When Harry Met Sally. And then, and of course, Sona, the reason you live in New York right now is because you love When Harry Met Sally. Just kidding.
Well, that might be taking it a bit far, but maybe a little bit.
And then what else does he have in? Oh, of course, Misery, which is one of the best thrillers of all times. And
yeah,
then,
I did not realize that until just now.
Oh, really? Wow. Yeah. And then A Few Good Men. And of course, Sona, that's why you're a lawyer.
Really, I am who I am today because of Rob Reiner.
Because of Rob Reiner. Yeah, and as tragic as the story is, obviously the details that are coming out now are even more this sad. But I
Awful.
did want to talk about the just what incredible joy this movie, his movies, especially that run. He really didn't have many hits after that run ended. He had The American President, which I'm not a huge fan of, but of course is again Aaron Sorkin, and The West Wing, hugely influential. It's basically a pilot episode for that whole show, and that's a very influential show in and of itself. But of course, he also produced Seinfeld. He produced all those other Stephen King adaptations that have been so culturally relevant, The Green Mile and Shawshank Redemption, just to name two more. But it's just his production company so influential. Of course, Seinfeld, huge. That's the real reason you live in New York. and,
Now you might be onto something.
So, of course, Rob Reiner has controlled your whole entire life, Sona, since you were a child. And so I do want to talk about the great things, but I did want you to ask, just like your obviously this filmography and how important it probably is to you as well.
Yeah, just so talented, from the guy that started out as Meathead on All in the Family, which is a show that my family watched when I was younger. So I feel like on some level, Rob Reiner has almost always been in my life.
For sure.
And as you mentioned, Stand By Me, I know, is one of my husband's favorite movies. I actually saw it for the first time last summer. I
Wow.
had never seen it before. And because you know how I am, every time we tried to look for it, it was never free. But last summer, we finally found it free someplace. And I watched it, and he was so excited to show it to me. And I think just the confluence of so many different things in pop culture, like when you watch Stand By Me, River Phoenix is in the story of River Phoenix and his talent and what happened to him. And I think he just has played such a big role in so many different areas of our culture today, in developing it in actors' careers. It's really amazing, hard to believe, honestly.
And still in front of the camera, as he has not been as
Yes.
important a director, but still we saw him in The Bear last, and we loved
Hmm.
seeing him in there. About 10 years ago, I think he got an Academy Award nomination even for being in Wolf of Wall Street. Just a hilarious role there, playing the Leo character's father, I believe it was. But just a hilarious performance in that film as well. And yeah, so just has just been in the culture for so long, and such a sad story here. Obviously, family stories like this are incredibly tragic and not
Really
rarely
tragic.
get this dark, obviously. But for someone who brought so much joy to the world, it's a real tragedy the way things ended for him. But we still have the movies forever.
Yeah. And it feels like maybe there could have been more ahead, right? Which is
For sure.
sad.
Yeah, I mean,
Have
his
you
production
heard?
company, and of course, I don't know how much he's still directing even now. And he had a movie that he finished directing. It's actually on the way. And he just made, not very good, unfortunately, but has some very funny scenes in it. He just made This Is Spinal Tap 2 this year. And apparently they shot Spinal Tap 3 at the same time.
Oh,
And
wow.
that one is on the way. So we'll see him in that in front of the screen. And of course, as director as well. So he has a couple more projects coming out, but all the stuff he produced as well, like just an incredible. You just think about all these people who are paying homage to him via social media, and it's not like these people are just saying nice things, which of course they would have anyway, but all these people worked with him. It's like pretty incredible.
So many people. Have you heard this really sweet story that's going around about the ending of When Harry Met Sally and his relationship with
Yes.
his wife?
Yeah, he met his wife during that movie. Yeah.
Yeah, and apparently the movie was supposed to end with Harry and Sally not getting together
Correct.
because he was falling in love with his wife at that time, met her while he was filming it. He changed the ending so that they ended up together. I don't know if this is true or not, but it's so sweet.
Yeah, that I've heard the same thing. I think it was in the New York Times podcast this week. So very sweet, and yeah, they had a great relationship, and but unfortunately, there were problems with addiction and
Mm,
mental illness probably within the family as well, and
really a tragedy.
yeah, it's really sad. All right, Sona. So I didn't get your opinion on last week. I was waiting to talk to you about it right now in this conversation. So, what did you think about The Gap, last week's episode, of course, about the Durian Gap, which we're not aware of. We were
We're
talking
not
about
aware of until just recently,
exactly.
which, by the way, I have visited Panama. I was there for 5 days and nobody ever mentioned that
No
gap
one
to me.
mentioned it.
Never came up. A lot about the canal when you go down there, but not so much
Right.
about the gap. So, yeah, it was really interesting to learn about it. I think that episode was beautifully shot,
Hmm.
first of all. It was just amazing to watch it. I will say, as somebody who we've talked about many times, how I would just love to watch an hour of two people talking to each other if the conversation is interesting. I
There's
struggled a
no
little
talking.
bit because there was very little dialogue in
Right.
the episode. So I did, while I appreciated everything that was happening and a lot was happening, I did struggle a little bit with the lack of dialogue. I think some people felt the episode was slow from what I was hearing. I didn't really feel it was slow. I think I was just struggling from the construction of it.
Yeah, I very much loved last week's episode in its very meditative way. And I love the fact that you're seeing this huge culture shock of somebody on foot trying to cross a 100-kilometer death trap. And then, of course, Carol also despondent in her own way, but in the lap of luxury, basically, with the whole world literally at her feet. And still with all the creature comforts, literally trying to commit suicide at one point in the show. So very, really fascinating to see that dichotomy. But like you said, there's very few little communication between anybody. Lots
Yeah,
of
it
songs,
was.
though. Lots of her singing different songs, though.
I think it did a good job of conveying the loneliness that, especially Carol,
Right.
was feeling. And I think, and this is something I'm just thinking about now as we're talking, our society has become so insular and you
Yep. Mhm.
don't have to interact with people if you don't want to at this point. And as an introvert, I kind of love that, but there is a limit to it, right? Where you do need some sort of human interaction and contact to just feel like you are a part of things and not isolated. And I think that's one thing that, bringing it back to living in the city, that makes the city really great for people like me, because even if you don't want to go out and affirmatively interact with people by having conversations and planning to do something with people and having these experiences of a shared meal, still, just when you go on about your day, you are forced to see so many people and in little ways interact with them. You make room for someone on the sidewalk or you buy your coffee from somebody. And those little human interactions have more value than we probably give them credit for.
Oh, absolutely. Just seeing that's going to circle back to one of the main questions I have on the current episode, but just the experience of being in that diner. And of course, she's still talking to Zosia, but just having all those people around her. And even if they're performing, but just like making eye contact, hearing the bustle of people, seeing the cars passing outside, which of course turns out to all be a performance. But it is what life is made out of. It's like being, like you said, even if you're an observer, you're still part of society, even as an observer, which
Exactly.
when you are getting your garbage picked up by drone, not
Mhm.
as a not a great technique either, but not as personable for to say the least.
I did love her putting the Georgia O'Keeffe in her house.
Yes, I love
So
that.
that made me smile so widely because I thought, wow, how amazing is that?
I love taking the print off the wall and replacing it with the actual painting.
Yes.
Fantastic. Oh, before it slips my mind and talking about you, it just made me think of it because you said how much you love just two people in the room talking to each other and how you could enjoy that as your like favorite type of entertainment. That going back to Rob Reiner, Castle Rock, his production company, also the producers of the three Before movies. So
My
Sona,
favorites.
another reason that you
A,
are the person you are today. Thank you
a
to Rob Reiner.
great example of just watching two people talk to each other.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Exactly. And I have a feeling that we're going to have two people talking to each other next week a lot, although via
Yeah.
some kind of translation tool.
Yes.
All right, we can touch on last week's episode as well, because I think it'll segue, or it should say intermingle with our conversation for today. But this episode is called Charm Offensive. Of course, we see a Charm Offensive. And here's my first question to you about the title. So, Charm Offensive, of course, as soon as I saw this, I had explicitly said this in our conversation that Carol's going about this the wrong way. You catch more bees with honey, hang out with these people, and you're going to find out a lot more about it. She has finally learned this, possibly by hanging out with Mr. Diabate and learning a little bit from him. That is maybe the better way to cozy up to these folks and do her discovery. But I do wonder that, is this charm offensive going in both directions?
This is so funny that you're saying this because when I read the title, I assumed the charm offensive was on the part of Zosia and the others. It
Oh,
hadn't even occurred to me as being on Carol's part. Isn't
oh,
that wild?
that is surprising, because I see why you can have that reading. There's a lot of ambiguity, which is why I found this episode so fascinating. It's, for me, every one of these episodes has functioned as some kind of a metaphor. Even in last week's episode, because we didn't talk about it, the metaphor there, I think, is very importantly is, I think you think about, like we cluelessly here, both of us, forgetting about the Durian Gap. You think about how it's very easy to have this idea of like immigration and how these immigrants are coming. And so it's very pointed that he's coming from South America, and that hundreds of thousands of people, I actually looked this up out of curiosity. I'm like, this is true that the Durian Gap is still not there's no road going through there still. I was shocked to discover this, by the way. Right. And
very much controlled by gangs and like it's a very dangerous area from what I've read.
Very dangerous. And hundreds of thousands of people literally cross through here on foot. And we see a little bit of it in the show, that everybody has to leave their belongings behind because it's so treacherous to make the crossing. So we, again, like people who live in the United States, we are not thinking about that situation. And he is literally making that crossing, right, through from South America to Central America. So very importantly, showing us the difference of, for example, like the culture that benefits from that migration, and then the treacherousness of the migration itself. So I think that's being illustrated there explicitly. In this episode, I thought the metaphor that was so fascinating to me was of...
Can I stop before you...
Please.
Before you get there? I just want to add one thing to your insight on that, which is the idea of the desperation that compels somebody to do that.
Absolutely.
And here in the episode, he thinks he has this responsibility. He feels he has this responsibility to save the world, and that it all rests with him and Carol Estricka. So,
right.
But I think it's very, to your point, very transferable to anybody who has decided to risk all of this. How desperate must they be in order to do that?
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And I think that's very important to what's being illustrated explicitly there, that taking your life in your hands for this experience, and then why. It must be something important.
Yeah.
And then the metaphor here in this episode, which I found so compelling, and I think you will too, it's just the idea of dating, right? It's the whole idea. There's another metaphor in here too that I think you'll also appreciate. But I love this, the discovery that these two people feeling each other out, and will they like this? Will they not like that? And trying to, it literally is like the development of a relationship. You see how the showing or the dates get more elaborate as they go on, and they get to know each other a little bit more. And all of a sudden there's some ribbing going on. Like the entity is like busting Carol's chops about her bad form when she's playing.
I love the light up sign. You suck, Carol. Made me laugh out loud.
It's also like dating Superman, by the way. Someone can turn off all the lights in the city at the snap of their fingers. It's a pretty impressive. I was mentioning in my solo recap that how intimidating but impressive it is. It literally is when Lois Lane is dating Superman or something, that you're like, oh, of all the people on the earth, they're paying attention. Like they're focused their attention on me right now. And they could literally do anything. And that's what they're doing at this moment. So it's intimidating and maybe off-putting in some ways, but also seductive, to say the least, right?
I don't know. Maybe I'm too cynical, but to me, it would be like, because they want to keep an eye on me. They want to know what I'm doing. They want to know what I'm thinking.
Well, that's what I think is really fascinating about it. The second metaphor I saw in there is something I think you like as well. With spy shows, the thing I like the most about spy shows is when they explore the idea that you have to play a role to be an effective spy. And then how you, at some point, have to enjoy the role you're playing, or else you won't be convincing. And then how that can be a very slippery slope. And you see it here. Carol is playing a role to get information. I love the fact that I'm a little surprised to hear that you didn't pick up on the charm offensive coming from her, because she obviously desperately wants human contact. So it's undeniable
Right.
that
Well, that's why. It's because I thought that's what was driving her. And I thought even when you see her write on the whiteboard, they eat people. It's
right.
her reminding herself, don't fall for their charm offensive because they eat people.
Oh yeah, no, that's what I think is fascinating about the dual charm offensive is exactly that. I'm going to play nice. So she discovers a lot of things, and we could touch on the things she discovers here about how this thing actually works, which is probably very useful for how it may be undone. But she discovers that by playing along, but she still thinks she's in control. And I think that's why it's so important the moment in the diner. It's exactly what you're describing when I am no longer in control of this fantasy. Like I need to get out of this situation. So I think it's really a fascinating moment. But I actually want to start the conversation, and we can actually move in both directions from this point, because it's going to touch on all of these ideas we're just touching on now, which is the kiss. So when Zosia goes in for the kiss, is it a play? Is it a way to manipulate Carol? Or is it because Carol's in a moment of despondency and they're impelled to make her feel better? Or is this entity actually starting to have an actual couple connection with Carol? Or is it some combination of those three things?
Wait, what was the last option again?
The last one is that they're actually falling for each other.
But when you say they, you mean the whole collective they, or do you mean that maybe there is some small element of Zosia in there that is falling for her?
That is
that is the big question here.
That's another question too. Yes, for sure. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's why I wanted to talk about that moment, because I think it can springboard into all these other moments of the. But how did you read that scene? Let's start with that.
I feel like they are trying to tell us, and listen, this is what I want to happen too. So maybe I'm not seeing it objectively. I hope they're trying to tell us that the original person is still deep in there somewhere and accessible in the right circumstances. I felt like the whole story with the mango ice cream
Yes.
was told in a way that seemed much more like an individual person relating their experience than someone reciting a memory, if that distinction makes sense.
Yep.
It felt more human than reading words off a page. This person remembers that she likes mango ice cream. So I also hope it's that, because as I mentioned once before, and we didn't really get into it, the whole idea of an intimate relationship
Yes.
gives me the heebie-jeebies unless that person is in there someplace and able to individually and independently consent to what's going on one hand. And on the other, I also get the heebie-jeebies from having an intimate relationship with the whole world at one time is troublesome.
It's like everyone's watching you live, right?
Yeah. So there's nothing about that I like. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's fascinating because, and this is why I wanted to start with that moment, because there's so many things going on there at the same time. The next morning, when Carol is typing again, actually, let's take a step back. So, because there's so much going on here at the same time. First of all, I've had this argument back and forth with one of our emailers that my impression is that there has to be some localized experience to these individuals. So there's, like you were saying, there might be some way you can peel away that aspects of them, or that minimally, even though there is that individual in front of you, there is some, and maybe like you're saying, it's just something I'm hoping for. Maybe there is some unique aspect of that individual that is still like more that original person than just the collective unconscious. And I think the show is telling us that here in multiple ways. First of all, the metaphor, which I think is a great way to explore it, of receiving a massage. And Zosia going, I am loving this massage. And she's like, what are you talking about? Aren't you just rubbing your own back?
Yes.
Because that's not really how it works. And this is the argument I had made before. This idea that this one brain is telling everybody, walk to the left, pick up that can of soup, right? Like the fact that is happening to 7 billion people at the same time is literally logistically impossible. Could you imagine a brain, no matter how large it was, that had 14 billion eyeballs? Like, what is it know to look at? So it's almost like the octopus's tentacles, which have like their own brains in them. It's almost like they're working autonomously and then checking in with the big brain in the center. So that's how, and almost this is how networking works as well, like from my technology background, which is probably why I have this bias in reading it this way. Also, because I just feel like it wouldn't work the other way. And she basically says that explicitly. It would be impossible to process all of this stuff coming in all at once. So what happens is that localized version is using the experience of the collective conscious to make a decision. But like to your point, is the decision maybe a little biased by the person underneath it all? And then, of course, checking into the group think, and now they're like, oh, I had a massage yesterday. So they have that. But only one person had the experience of hands on their body, not a recollection of it or like the uploading of the experience. So there is still something happening locally that might be occurring, or it could be wishful thinking. And this is why I love this episode so much. Then we go to the end of the episode, and 2 weeks have passed, and all of a sudden, Zosia is much more comfortable with using the word I, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was so impressed with that. Like when she walks into the kitchen and she says, I, all of a sudden, I'm like, God, I suddenly am like totally comfortable with like having a relationship with this person. And I think you as an audience member we're supposed to be in Carol's shoes for this episode. And I'm like, it's so weird that just changing the pronoun has now made this easier for me. Really fascinating. And then it makes you think about that question. Now, when she starts saying I, is this just Carol and us as viewers hoping that it is a more personalized experience? Or are we it's just more plausible deniability that now by conveying the story that way, we suddenly feel like it is that the person's personal experience? Because I agree, this actress is doing an incredible job of picking out that memory. But you can see, regardless of what's actually going on, it is this entity actually saying, hold on a second, let me check in, let me check. And at first it's just, it's pulling in a fact. But then that fact starts to manifest more like a sense memory of,
it has color to it.
Yes. And the way that like one factoid like blossoms into a lived experience is incredible to watch. It's like so beautiful, I think. But it could all be an illusion. It could all be an illusion as well.
It could be. Also, complete tangent here, but where are the eggs coming from? She's making an omelet.
Good point. You know what? First of all, they probably have extra eggs sitting around. And I think they can probably, there are chickens out there, chicken farms, and I guess they can still pick up the eggs, no? Or did they free all the chickens?
I would assume the chickens got freed. Who's farming them?
They could farm the animals. They do pick up they do pick up all the apples that fall off the trees. So the chickens are laying eggs, but then those eggs are potential life. So I don't know if they could. Yeah, that's a very good question. The egg question is a good one.
Yeah, maybe the chickens are wild and laying eggs and they're collecting them. I don't know. This is not the point, just something that crossed my mind.
But an egg is a potential life. So I guess but if the egg is never fertilized, then it's not going to be.
But if they're wild, you don't know if they're fertilized or not at that point.
Unless someone's just watching them all day long. Yeah, just every one of these little decisions are very complicated. But most likely, there are way more than enough eggs for Carol to be able to survive in the general region because they're just drinking their human protein. They're not necessarily having eggs. I guess they are eating eggs as well because anything that's about to spoil, they would probably put into their protein goop as well. Because they did mention that, right? That they're making this stuff. It's like, well, or John Cena actually tells us that what's in there. Well, it depends what is locally available, depending on where the food's being processed. But part of it always is humans. They eat people. So so I was really fascinated by that moment. Oh, and of course, the show is constantly playing with our expectations, I think, in the fact that when Zosia's having that experience and then suddenly she like freezes up, and Carol's thinking like, oh my God, have I done it? Or maybe that's what I'm thinking. I don't know if you were thinking the same thing. But of course, it's just that she's like a little upset. Her facial expression is great. She's just kind of, you're about to have a visitor. I did like the disappointment passing over her face. So the entity's not so happy about Manuso's coming to see Carol. How did you read that, by the way, when she freezes up there for a second? Were you for a moment thinking that it is like somehow this personal memory had short circuited something?
No, I felt it was the hive mind sending in an alert of wait, something's happening. And she was trying to receive that message. It reminded me of back in the beginning where Carol is asking to get together with the remaining
Right,
people of the
exactly.
12 that speak English. And she says something like, okay, hold on. And she's communicating through, I guess now we know it's some sort of electromagnetism or whatever. And then she just spaces out for a second and then comes back and says, okay, sure. So I thought it was reminiscent of that.
I want to talk about some of the revelations we made about how this thing might work. And then I have some theories that I want to run by you. But before then, I want to touch on a few more scenes in the show that were so impressive to me. What did you think about the one of the best love bombings of all times, recreating your entire life experience of the moment you first wrote your first novel?
It's bananas once you find out the diner burned down.
Yes.
It was one thing when I thought, well, these people maybe don't have so many other demands on their time, and they all did this casino thing for the other guy, and this is
Right.
just a different version of it. But reconstructing the building and also getting that waitress from Florida or wherever she was,
Yes. Why are you in? Just for
this is over the top. It should have been disturbing to Carol, and I'm happy that it was. What were your thoughts?
yeah, I feel I had the same experience that Carol had, where at first I'm like, wow, this is so incredible. What a pleasure. And then only to be like, hang on a second. And I think what broke the spell was they took it too far by dragging that woman across the country just to play
Mhm.
act your past. It seems like it suddenly becomes creepy, like you said, as opposed to you can imagine if someone at a much smaller scale, like recreated a set that represented like whatever your childhood bedroom or something, and you're like, oh my god, I can't believe you did this, and that would be something that could be a little creepy as well, unless you personally wanted it, like I mentioned that you actually wanted that experience or not. But yeah, if you suddenly dragged your high school teacher to be there, you're like, what's happening now? This is getting crazy, and of course against their will, no less in this particular case. But
Well, I think they're all willing to do whatever. I don't think it's necessarily
well, they don't have individual will, right? Is
yes.
the the but what's really, did you notice the detail, by the way, in that particular set, the diner set, that she notices the tape on the, she starts picking at that piece of tape on the seat, which I think is such an incredible detail because think about it. It's not even like they found the bench somewhere. This all burned down. So they
Mhm.
rebuilt everything, including the bench, and then they aged it to match its previous condition, which is pretty incredible. Oh, and of course we crossed the line here. Yeah, let's talk about some of the discoveries we've made here based on all the notes she's put up on her board. First of all, how they communicate with each other, right? So there is this scene on the mountaintop, which, by the way, another great thing about that scene. How did you read this? I love the fact when, and Carol might be lying for all we know, but I think she's being sincere, where she says, I love the sound of a train whistle. It's like the loneliest sound in the world. And Zosia is shocked. She's like, I didn't know that. And I really liked the fact that even it's like surprised by this revelation that
Mhm.
it wasn't aware of, right? And it just speaks to the fact that even when you know everything, there are still things to know. But
Yeah,
that's
and
the
the idea that there are certain thoughts people have that they have
right.
never told a single other person.
Exactly. That there is stuff inside of you that you only know in your own mind, which is, yeah, definitely the case. And I love that. But it's interesting too that it seems self-defeating the way that this entity works because it obviously craves the attention and wants the to serve Carol because she is this non-unified person, and they seem to be wired to want to please these other people. But if you unify everybody, then there are no other people to. So that seems self-defeating in a way, but also like obviously the pleasure it gets in recreating these old memories, in making a discovery that they didn't know something about Carol, or most important of all, in this context of the show, that they really want her to write that next book because there are no new books ever.
I know. Yes.
So it is self-defeating that if they merged Carol, that they would lose all of that. So I think that's part of what's seductive about this to Carol, right? That this is the perfect audience for her. They know all her mythology and they truly crave it, right? Like, even think about it, even if they weren't the biggest fans of these books, although of course some aspect of them love these books deeply, but even if they weren't, it's like, this is all you get. Like, you may have Shakespeare, sure, you'll always have that, but you can only reread Shakespeare so many infinite times in your head. This is the only new thing coming ever again. So I think it is interesting that they would want to eradicate the people that could demand it in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that is really interesting to me. They don't really fully know how the mind glue works, but apparently it's using some kind of signal using
Well,
their
wait,
own.
hold
Yeah,
on. I was thinking
sure.
about what you were saying.
Oh yeah, go ahead,
All
please.
right. I guess it hadn't occurred to me that they, not that they enjoy things, but that they need entertainment.
Right.
It just seemed like they're very mission driven. So,
But maybe because they don't have that, they are very mission driven, obviously. And we do find out that the main thing they're doing here is building a giant antenna. By the way, Alan, who emails us, had predicted this was giant antenna out there. Indeed, he's correct. And they want to transfer this to wherever. I guess they would pick another candidate planet and broadcast it in that general direction if they
right.
find something similar to the previous one. And then how long has that been going on for? So all these things are interesting questions. But to your point, they do seem to take pleasure, but they don't self-direct towards pleasure. So I do wonder, yeah, like, what wouldn't you want to keep a few of these people around? And probably more than just a dozen, to be honest, because given the population of the world.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, go ahead. I detoured you for a second there.
Oh no, I wanted to get your feedback on that. I just didn't think you were gonna had anything to add, but I'm glad it made you think of something. Yes, so some of the discoveries here that tie into that, we find out that there is a localized experience, which is then shared with the collective. They also have this discovery that they use some kind of transmissions like radio signals, but not directed radio signals. It's like breathing. But here's my first theory that we can dig into a little bit, and it might tie into the finale. I was thinking that when Manusos was going around a dial and finding the signal, I'm like, that signal must be the signal, the original transmission, and that maybe there's some encoded message there. Although based on the earlier episodes, it doesn't seem like there was any message other than the actual sequence of the RNA. But maybe there was something in there. Anyway, I was still thinking that's probably what it is, and he'll somehow intercept it. They'll interpret it and find out some shocking revelation by using Morse code or something, which I doubt would make sense because how would aliens know Morse code? But whatever, they would figure it out mathematically or something. That's what I was thinking. But now after seeing this episode, I'm like, wait a second, is he intercepting their signal, the signal that binds them to each other? Because if he can identify that signal, then you can imagine if you can come up with some kind of dampener that at least you could disconnect individual people if you could block that signal, right?
Interesting.
So maybe that's where the show is going. They have to wear tinfoil hats. So imagine that's the actual solution.
Bringing it all back to Better Call Saul.
That's right. And of course, the other thing is we already knew which planet this was. I wasn't familiar with this region of the solar system, but it's only 643 light years away.
That's all?
Only. Well, the reason I say only is because I was thinking, is this like hundreds of thousands of light years away? Because in that case, there's very little chance that aliens could see, some alien life force could see us at that distance and be like, that looks like a good planet, looking 10 million years into the past. Like, what would they see there? But 600 and something years away, then you can imagine, like, if they saw us through a powerful telescope 600 years ago, we were already obviously an advanced society that had agriculture and architecture. So they would say, oh, well, there's a good candidate with intelligent life. Obviously, they're building stuff. So here's where we're going to shoot our antenna at those folks. But I'm pretty sure that there is no intelligent life there. But who knows? We don't know. The sky is very big, so there could be things out there that we don't know about.
The sky is very big. I agree.
Sky's big. The world is very big. Think about that. The world is big, I should say. I remember with Manuso listening to his tapes last week of learning American. The world is big. Yes, the world is big indeed. By the way, last week's episode shot in the Canary Islands. Did you know that?
I didn't. That's interesting.
All right, a couple of things I want to touch base on theory-wise and also just in the show that I thought wanted to run by you. One was I love the idea that Carol, of course, writes a story and then the fans of her story get to live inside that world temporarily, right? So that's her authorship. But she's writing in this scenario, she's writing a new story. And this goes back to my hobby horse of using this as an AI metaphor, that explicitly that we see that the entity via Zosia and all the people there in Albuquerque, they are able to create this memory that similarly they're authoring this experience for Carol, and she gets to sit down and people are driving around outside and the same waitress is there serving her coffee, but all they're doing is giving her a previous experience because they cannot project into the future. And again, this is my hobby horse about the limitations of AI, that new content, at least the way AI is now anyway, new stories only come from people. That AI is great at summarizing a Wikipedia article, but not great at inventing a new language, for example. But I did think it was really interesting that you have these two people on both sides of the table who are able to create an experience for the other one to live inside of, but one is writing a new fictional story. The other one is simply regurgitating a memory impeccably, but only recreating a memory for the other person.
Well, I think it's an interesting parallelism, but I also wonder about the motivation behind each of those creations, maybe getting back to the title, The Charm Offensive, because is it really done out of the motivation of this person would really enjoy this experience and I want this person to be happy with no further hope for what that would result in? Or is it done to manipulate in some way? And for Carol with the writing, I'm really not sure where to land with that because she's shown so much ambivalence about the type of literature that she writes that now being excited about it seems strange, although she is getting to make Ravon a woman, which is what she always wanted.
Right. So in that way, she finally
But we know she's had disdain for her own creation in the past.
But did she secretly want to have the right kind of audience? So that becomes like almost the inadvertent aspect of there's obviously the overt seduction of her in this episode, but there is this maybe side effect as well in the fact that, and I think it's open to interpretation, when Carol wakes up the next morning after they make love and she starts writing that first chapter, and she's nervous about her reading the copy, right? And again, I think it's very important. Like when Zosia wakes up and she hears the typing, she smiles to herself. And this is where I wonder if there is some actual bond forming between them. Of course, there's an agenda on both sides, but an actual bond, because Zosia's not performing for anybody there. She's not like dead-faced and then she walks into the room and smiles at Carol and she's like a pod person. She's happy to hear the typing. Is that because Carol's now distracted from her investigation? Possibly. But I think that there's some aspect of it where she wants to read the story.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah.
And then, of course, on the opposite side, you have Carol again. She could be like, "Oh yeah, you think so? Do you think that was a good plot twist?" And it's all a performance, but she's nervous to hear what she's going to say. So I think that there is and she knows she can't lie also, right? So she knows she's going to get an honest assessment, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is interesting. Just loved all of this. And I love every interaction is, first of all, developing the characters and developing the entity. Like I've been critical of the fact that I always feel like we're on the outside looking in. The entity is still a mystery to us, but we're starting to, through this dating process we saw this week, starting to get a little bit of a handle on it. But then just like when you date someone, you don't know exactly what's going on in their heads. You're just discovering them a little bit at a time. And I thought that was really well done. And yeah, but I think that there's so much ambiguity in all of this still. Like a spy show, you watch it and you think, but are they primarily manipulating them or primarily falling for them, or both? It's really a lot of fun. I really love this episode.
Well, I do think, contrary to my own questioning about Carol's motivation, for you to wake up early and rush to write something,
Yes.
then there
Mm-hmm.
is some passion compelling you. That's not something you would do unless you really wanted to.
Right. If she was going to go perform this, then she could have given her old pages and said, "Oh, I wrote this yesterday while you were away or something." But exactly to your point, she woke up bright and early the next morning, immediately started typing, and she didn't hand her like garbage to be like, she'll read anything I give her. She's literally nervous. Was that good? I hope she's going to like it. So all
Yeah.
of that is really compelling stuff. And also a little sad because I think the discovery that her actual wife didn't love her writing. And I couldn't help but think about this because my wife is just catching up on the show now. And she literally, last night, we watched 2.5 episodes of the show. And one of them was when she discovers I can't lie and says, "What did my wife think? What did Helen think of my writing?" And she found that out. So watching that and then watching this episode basically half an hour later, watching this episode, and the idea that all of a sudden she has someone who legitimately she feels like loves her writing and does indeed, right? Some aspect of this entity has had its life saved by the love of these books. So it is very important to this. And again, it's like, well, yeah, you have exactly the audience you've always wanted, but is it real, or at what cost, more importantly? The loss of all those individuals.
Yeah, I'm wondering too, as far as a collective opinion, we know there were people that loved her books, but we also know there were people that thought they were just drivel. So, how do you, I guess maybe it's just the excitement of having anything new to read, because otherwise, whose opinion wins?
Right. Absolutely. And that is maybe like the best segue we have to what am I have in my theory here, that I am pretty confident at this point that this thing is a weapon. And the reason
Is a
I
what?
mentioned it's a weapon,
Okay.
this mind glue thing is
Okay.
a weapon from some other species. And the reason I mentioned that is exactly what you described. The reality is if this was just like the average, right? If this unified entity purely was this is just the average opinion that everyone has, and like I mentioned in the previous conversation we had, our discussion, the like where does the pettiness go, where does the envy go, where does the psychosis go, that these people have all of those aspects, right? They have different sexual preferences, they have different preferences for food that they want to eat, they have different preferences for the color or the clothing they'd like to wear, right? So there's so many. Are they all just wearing the same tan uniform or the most convenient thing? No, they are actually dressing the way they did before because there is some localized preference that is still being expressed. So there is some different aspects of these personalities that, like you said, if you just flattened it all out, why wouldn't, if a majority of people hate her book, why wouldn't that be the opinion of the entity?
Right.
So there's some overriding programming that is always positive, is always nonviolent. Perfect example. I will never kill anything, but there are plenty of people who hunt animals all the time. They obviously lost the argument internally. Why is that the case? So there's something internally in their programming. It's not just like this is the average of all of us. There is something that is some aspects, those negative aspects are being suppressed. And what I thought
Overruled.
was,
Yeah.
imagine you have a collection of intelligent beings that you identify from 640 light years away, and you need to repopulate a planet with your own species. And what you do is you send out this mind virus, which then goes and infects all those people. And it doesn't turn them into like savages that kill each other off. What they do is they starve off until it gets to some moment of equilibrium, right? You probably don't want to exterminate these people because at some point there'll be enough food, enough resources for some subset of them to survive. But not only that, you make them to be like a happy slave race. But for what? For another intelligent group of citizens to show up, and then they will be at your beck and call and will be happy to do so. So that's my theory. My theory is that this was sent out as a way to basically make a docile existing population that will also thin itself out so that when you arrive, not only are they not out, they don't outnumber you, but they are more than happy to do anything that you ask them to do.
So just slavery all over again.
Well, I mean, the difference there is that I'm pretty sure that most of those slaves were not happy. They might have performed being happy to do whatever they were told to do, but just for their own well-being. But
No, I understand that part.
yes, but yes, no, it is definitely a metaphor for slavery, except for the fact here is that you basically have an enslaved race that is being drip fed like an opioid, basically, which keeps them in, like living in their perfect nirvana, maybe addicted to that sense. And if you read it that way, then Carol really needs to rescue these people from basically this opioid, which is this warm, fuzzy feeling they get when they cuddle up together in their big cuddle puddle. Is that what she calls it? A cuddle puddle, where they all sleep together. By the way, to our question before, Sona, did you notice on her whiteboard that she puts cuddle puddle and then she puts sex question mark?
Yeah. So getting to that idea, not exactly, but I just had a question about married couples and family structures
Yeah.
in this new environment. Like we see Lakshmi is still with her family, but has not been converted.
Right.
If you have become part of this collectivism, is there any reason or need to stay with your spouse or your children? Does everybody just wander off to go where they're needed, or does the family unit stay together?
I don't know. They're all together, so I think it doesn't matter, right? Like they don't even live in their own homes anymore.
Yeah, but would you even sleep next to each other, or would you just whatever happens?
I think whatever happens, but
Yeah.
we discussed it here. I don't think they're having sex unless they're commanded to. She actually jokes. It turns out to be a joke, by the way. She's like, "Would you like it to turn into an orgy?" And then Carol looks at her and she just smirks and goes like, "Yeah." Although I'm sure that that's exactly what's happening in Las Vegas, right? So it's not necessarily like they probably would follow her command, but I don't think they're trying to procreate for, like you mentioned before. It did make me think about that because at one point the Zosia mentions that there had been like 1,000 births and 1,000 something deaths. And I'm like, oh, they're still having kids. But I'm like, it's only been a few months. So plenty of people were pregnant, obviously,
Yes,
before
but
this
would
began.
those babies automatically be part of this, or might some of them be immune?
It's possible some of them would be immune, but they wouldn't know until they grew up
Right.
to a certain extent, right? But I guess they would know immediately, by the way. That's a good point, because they would know immediately if the brain had merged with their hive mind, like they knew exactly when Helen had merged the moments before she died. So they would probably know if they found any more immune babies. That would be interesting, right? Imagine there's another baby that's born in this period of time and it gets left with the folks that are not with Helen, or sorry, with Carol. That would be interesting. Imagine Carol, Manuso, and a baby. What a weird combination we'd have at the end of the season. But it's very possible. These babies are still being born, and it could be a bizarro family unit that occurs there. And they
I
might be
don't
more.
know why these questions are just occurring to me 6 or 7 episodes in, but I wonder.
Yeah, and I think this show is allowing us to be honest, some of these questions I didn't want to nitpick too much because I'm not sure if they've thought them all out. And then I could end up ruining the experience of the show if I ask too many questions that don't get answered. But I do think they have thought about these things, the writers. So I'm very curious to see how the show evolves over time. Do you have any prediction? I'll just say one thing that I've read multiple times from multiple different interviewees, that everybody who read the script, I think it was the actress who plays Zosia, was talking about it. And one of the directors was talking about reading the scripts, or maybe the person who directed the final episode. And all of them saying, I could not believe the shock of the final moments of the episode. And I was like, if you could guess right now, what kind of shock ending do you think it would be? Do you think that somehow they figure out how to undo it? I can't imagine that he's that Manuso. So we need to talk about Manuso for a few minutes here, but that Manuso is just going to go there and snap his fingers and figure out how to undo this. So I'm curious to know what that shock might be at the ending, if you have any ideas.
I don't have any ideas, but I do have a feeling this is going to be like a Severance season 1 type ending where just in the final moments, something bananas happens and then you have to wait.
And then you have to wait for, who knows? They're working on the scripts now, by the way. So if they start shooting in the next couple of months, I mean, they took almost, I don't know what it was, 7 or 8 months to shoot the show. And then they spent almost a year in post-production, which that might have, the most post-production, that 1 year gap might have been like they were looking for an up time on the calendar. They maybe didn't want to put it on right after Severance or something, kind of space it out. So maybe they didn't need a year. But my point is, even if it's 6 months of shooting and 6 months of post-production, and they start shooting in the beginning of next year, we're still got to wait till 2027 for the next. I don't want to wait that long. At least as long as it's not 3 years like Severance, I'll be
really.
There was a pandemic and a writer's strike in the middle of all that, so that did add to it for sure. Yeah, but let's talk about Manuso for a little bit before we wrap up. Yeah, so I love this character. Man, this guy is really, he's hardcore. But I think it's interesting that I think Carol, being as stubborn as she was, it's self-defeating that once again you can catch more flies or bees with honey, I should say.
I think it's flies.
Is it flies? I thought it was, oh yeah, that's a good point. You get more flies with honey, correct. That she seems like that was wrong for her, but man, she is nothing compared to Manusos, right? He won't eat anything they give him. He will not take a favor from them. And not only that, like he literally is rescued. Oh, question for you. Last week, he collapses. We see the helicopter coming down. Interesting production detail. When he collapses in the forest, they shot that in the Canary Islands.
Right.
When the helicopter's coming down, they shot that in Albuquerque.
Oh, okay.
So he traveling through continents for that one episode of the show.
Funny.
But anyway, when he puts his hand up and waves, and they had said to him, just wave at any time and they'll come and assist him.
Yeah.
Is he waving? Is he blocking the sun from his eyes? Is he waving, please save me? Is he waving, go away? Like, how did you read that?
Interesting question. To me, at the time, it looked like he was blocking the sun from his eyes because it was very lit up, right? The figure on the ladder from the helicopter, if I'm remembering correctly. But maybe it was all three of those things at once.
Yeah. Given Manuso's temperament, it seems like he would have told him to leave and he would die willingly.
Yeah.
But maybe not.
When push comes to though.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think that even if he had waved them away at that point, that they're going to rescue him no matter what. So
probably.
But he is so, once again, this self-defeating nature of his, he could have stayed in the hospital and still made it to see Carol, maybe even sooner, even if he just got into a car and drove the rest of the way, which took him another 2 weeks, I guess it took.
Right.
But even if that was the case, that he still could have stayed there till he healed. It's not going to make him any time. Like I think that's what's interesting about him. And I think that's what's going to happen, that Carol is obviously dead set in her ways, but willing to bend the rules to get what she wants for convenience sake. And Manusos is a hardliner. He will die to stick by his principles. And Carol definitely is not willing to die. Like Carol's survival is her number one priority. And Manuso's priority is to stick to his moral beliefs. And those two things are not maybe going to work well together.
But I think for Manusos, in his mind, it could partly be a question of survival because he doesn't trust these people. So I think he believes the longer he's around them, the more likely something bad is to happen.
He does believe that, but he knows at this point, he seems to be pretty clear that he knows that they're not going to force themselves on him, or else they would have already. And think about it, waking up in the hospital, if they wanted to do anything to force him to, for example, he doesn't know this obviously, but if they want to extract his stem cells while he was unconscious, they could have easily done so, but they didn't because they have their own philosophies as well.
Yes, but he doesn't know how it works. So maybe he thinks they'll brainwash him or something if he sticks around too long.
Yeah, but I love when he burns his own car and he's just like, none of this is yours.
Yeah, definitely making a point. I do think Carol folded surprisingly fast, honestly.
Folded as far as
working with the Hive to get the things that she needs or that type of thing. Episodes ago.
Within an hour.
Yeah.
Right. That happened instantaneously, right?
Yeah.
She's just like, when they come and she's trying to bury Helen and they come with an excavator, she's like, okay.
Yeah.
You could do that. Sure. Thanks. Oh, by the way, I should just touch on one thing. Speaking of Helen, I do think it's very pointed. And part of the reason that in my mind, I thought, oh, this is pretty messed up, that in a way she has ended up with this ideal mate because it is simply acting and pretending to be, maybe it's legitimate, by the way, but regardless of whether it's legitimate or whether it's a performance, she's now like swapped out Helen for this new mate that loves her books and is recreating, she's dating Superman at this moment. So that whole experience, I think the show draws our attention to it when she's washing the dishes and she looks out onto the patio, of course, which is where Helen's body is buried.
Yeah, for
just
sure.
before Zosia comes up
Yes.
behind her, right? So
Yes.
very interesting. Yeah. Anyway, great episode. I
I
cannot
also
wait.
just
Yeah,
one
go ahead.
quick shout out. It's not a scene of so much significance, but I found it very entertaining when she's trying to figure out what game to play with Zosia, and she
Oh yes, of
realizes
course. Yes.
there's no point to most of them because she has all the knowledge of everybody ever. And as she was looking, I was thinking, you need something entirely luck based. It's
Right,
got to be
right.
like Candyland or something.
Or you could play War or something, right? That's just luck as well.
Well,
So-
they ended up with Spit.
which is
So
even more random. Exactly. I did love that. I also loved that exploration of that idea that she's really good at croquet. And she's, well, I do have like professional polo players inside of me.
yes.
And she goes, yeah, but you know, you haven't played croquet before. And, but I think it's true, right? It's the analogy I made in my solo recap is if the body of John Cena and the body of Zosia go to lift weights,
Yep.
then obviously he has more muscle. So he's going to be able to lift more
Right.
weights. But if Zosia and someone who has the same frame as her have never lifted weights before, and they both go to lift weights, Zosia's going to lift way more weights than the untrained person because she knows like form and all these other things.
Yes.
She has the mental experience of having done that activity before. So I do think it's interesting that they bring that up because I think that is going to be an important reference point back later on in the show.
By the way, I don't think this is an analogy that we're trying to make whatsoever. But whenever I see a scene of two women playing croquet, it makes me think of Heather's.
Heather's, yeah, same thing here. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just MVP here. Obviously, Rhea Seehorn, always great. I love the moment where she starts to break down and says, I'm going to do what I need to do to save you people. You guys are demented and psychotic, and you are starving yourselves to death. And this is wrong, and it makes no sense, and it's an inevitable train wreck. So I have to do this no matter what.
Yeah, doesn't
even
she
if I
say
end
you
up
won't even pick an apple, something like that, right?
exactly. And she goes, even if I end up alone again, and that's when she has her in the emotional breakdown, and great performance there. But even more so this episode, the actress who's playing Zosia has been so great at just being this like kind of warm presence, but just the incredible, just to shout out amazing acting. That moment when the camera's just on her, she's like the only face on screen. And she's like, yeah, what was my favorite food? Ice cream, mango ice cream. Why mango? When I was 10 years old. And as she's like going deeper and deeper into this memory, it is an incredible performance. Like really.
I agree.
Yeah. Everybody's killing it on the show. Love it. Love
That's
it.
right.
All right. And so excited for the season finale, which we're getting early. I was hoping we are going to get it early, Sona. We're getting it early. We're getting it on Tuesday night if you're on the East Coast. Officially Wednesday, but it always drops a few hours early. So yeah, we will be recording. Hopefully, Sona. Maybe we'll just talk about it right now. Are you off on the 24th? What are you doing on the 24th?
I am technically off on the 24th. Yes.
All right, cool. So we should record as early as possible before family starts showing up. I will have family coming over that day. So maybe we record early in the morning if it works for you. Or Tuesday night. Is that? No, that's not. That's way too ambitious, right?
That's a little ambitious only because I can't really stay up past 10:30.
Good point. And that's about when you would be done with this. It is a 1 hour episode. So it's the longest episode. This was the shortest episode of the season. Next week, the longest one, not surprisingly, of course. Longest is still under an hour.
Yeah.
Mercifully not an hour and 20 minutes per episode. Thank God.
Right.
For the purposes of our recaps anyway. And Avatar. So I'm going to go see Avatar with my daughter this weekend. Her first IMAX 3D experience.
Exciting.
But anyone in your house into the Avatars? How's your son into him at all? Any experience?
Honestly, all of us just see it on TV and we're like, are they still making these? What's happening? None of us have followed the whole Avatar situation.
It really is. I have watched the second Avatar movie, which I loved in the theaters. I have watched it at home with my daughter, and it was fine. It was fine at home. But seeing that in 3D, like I complain all the time when you see most of these like Avengers films and such that the special effects are
Mhm.
so lame. Seeing it so immersive, so incredible.
I
All
can imagine.
the underwater sequences are incredible, like really, truly incredible. And but the experience of in the theater is quite something. So
Yeah, I can imagine that. Well, I hope you guys enjoy it. That sounds like a great outing.
yeah, can't wait. And I'll have a review of it sometime next week. All right, Sona, thank you again for the conversation.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.